Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. My guest today is Jen Mohawk, and she is Senior Director of Medical Affairs at Apogee Therapeutics. And we talk about MSL burnout and how to handle the stress of the job. So I think everybody is going to get a lot out of this conversation. Jen was awesome. Don't forget to follow me on LinkedIn and join us for MSL Talk Live, which is typically the first Tuesday of every month at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And those announcements will come out on LinkedIn. As always, thank you guys for all of your support of this show, for subscribing, and for sharing. Welcome to MSL Talk with Tom Caravela, a podcast specifically designed for MSLs and all things field medical. Hey, Jen, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Long-time listener, first-time caller here.
I love it. I love it. Well, guys, you are in for a treat. So Jen and I, just to give you guys some backstory, we had a conversation in San Diego at Mass West and came up with this idea to do this podcast together. And I love this topic, and I think Jen's going to be awesome. But before we get into it, Jen, why don't you do an introduction, tell everybody who you are and all that good stuff.
Sure, thanks. So I'm Jen Mohawk. I'm a senior medical director with Apogee Therapeutics, but I'm not here speaking on their behalf. My views are my own. I did my PhD in circadian biology, actually, at the University of Michigan, go Blue. But after quite a stint in academic research, I decided it was time for a change. And when I pivoted, I went into dermatology and immunology and medical affairs. So that's what I've been doing ever since.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us. So guys, we're going to talk about MSL burnout. And before we do, I just want to say the MSL job is the best job in the world. You know, I did an episode recently with Kirsten Gertowski on the dark side of MSLing, and people loved it. It was like one of the most downloaded episodes in 2023. The only thing is some people were like, oh, it's kind of negative. And it's like, it really wasn't. I don't know why a couple people had to make comments that like, I think if you guys listen to this podcast enough, you'll know that it's like glass half full always. But we do need to be real in order to help people. You're not going to grow unless you know that there are things that you need to be aware of. So this is not the same conversation. It's a little different. We're going to talk about burnout. So before we get into that, Jen, can you give everyone a definition of what MSL burnout actually is?
Yes. So I have a recipe for burnout, and it is stress plus emotional and or physical exhaustion plus negative self-feelings. And that equals burnout. And it's a condition. It's not a disease, but I do think it can be contagious and spread through teams for sure.
Spreads through teams because one starts talking and then...
I think the conditions that lead to burnout in one individual, while they might not be specific to the workplace, often that's a contributor. So people in the same environment are more likely to be experiencing the same things. And I also think that there are actions that individual takes then that make it more likely to spread, as well as just kind of the natural social interactions that lead to that kind of contagion psychologically.
That makes sense. I didn't think that this was contagious. I didn't think it was a contagious thing, but it does make sense because misery loves company.
It does.
And it's lonely. I was in the field for 10 years, and it's lonely in the field. So what happens is you keep in touch with your colleagues, you start sharing stories, and you start commiserating, and then all of a sudden, what one person is feeling, all of a sudden someone else is feeling, well, yeah, I feel that too. Whether you did or you didn't, I think. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I think so. And also just the, when you're burned out, it changes the way you approach everything. And I think even when you have, and I'm not saying that you're a bad person then on the team or in the culture, but when you're bringing that negativity spreads really easily, as does positivity. But
yeah. And it's natural, but I think if we can try to get ahead of it and realize that you're not helping yourself and you're not helping the other person. You're not helping. You think you're helping each other, but you're really not. You're just bringing each other down. So let's talk about, you mentioned stress. was one of the things you mentioned. Let's talk about that. So what are the stressors that you're seeing MSLs face these days?
Yeah, MSLs face a lot of the same stressors that everybody else faces. Some that I think are very prevalent in the job are high job demands. It's a demanding job. It is. I think on certain teams and in certain environments, there can be a lack of control and autonomy and a lack of support. That's something that can be avoided, right? There are teams with great cultures where that won't be an issue. But if you're in a situation where you don't feel you have control over what you're doing, you don't feel you have autonomy, that leads to burnout really quickly. The travel, of course, can provide some stress depending on the context, and work-life balance and all of these things. It's not necessarily, in my mind, at least, the stressor that is the problem, but it's you have a physiological response to that stressor, and it's not adaptive. It's not made to help you deal with that stressor, right? Our stress systems evolved in a very different environment than the one we live in now. So it doesn't help us when our body responds to a negative comment from a colleague on a team call the same way it would to getting kicked out of our tribe, right? Responding to a flight delay as if we're being attacked by a bear is not necessarily helpful.
Yeah. So there's just some normal stressors that come with the job, it sounds like.
1,000,000%.
And do you think that some people are just better equipped at handling it than others?
Yes, and I also think that the support environment of your team makes a difference, and the end product of dealing with those stressors. Is there a good payoff? Is there a good why behind it? That matters.
Yeah. How widespread would you say this is? Is this common, or is it just like, oh, like maybe 1 out of every 10 people, or is this everybody gets this at some point?
I think almost everyone has experienced burnout at some point in their lives. But I haven't seen data on MSL specifically, at least not a large survey. AFLAC does a survey of the American workforce every year. And the last few years, they found that about 60% of the American workforce says that they're suffering from at least moderate burnout, with 1 in 4 saying their burnout level is high or very high. So that's a lot of burnout.
Yeah. But I think it's also like a lot of the MSLs I know and I talk to are overachievers, and a lot of the stress they put on themselves. They want to do well. They're really smart and well educated, and they're out there to do a good job. So I think that that's a part of it too. I think some of it's self-inflicted because we just all want to do well, and I think it goes for. I mean, I feel like every single day I leave here like someone just beat me up. Like when you work hard and you work really hard and you leave it all in the field, there is some level of almost daily burnout. So I feel this, but then I also have ways of coping and getting through it so that the next day I wake up, I'm totally refreshed. It's like new day, no burnout, I'm good to go. How do you feel about that? Is that just me making this up?
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference is, right, you're taking time to separate yourself from those daily stressors so it doesn't become real burnout, right? That's end of the day exhaustion. But I totally resonate with what you say too, because the overachievers that tend to come into this field, I think that's where that negative self-feelings part of the burnout recipe comes into play. So if you feel that failure on any one point then makes you a bad person or makes you a bad MSL, then that's a problem. And failure is good, right? We have to fail to achieve. We just want to fail well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that part is a big contributor.
Yeah, totally. No, I agree with that. There's that expression, fail fast and fail forward. So looking at where we are right now, do you think that COVID has played a role in MSLs facing more burnout post-COVID? Does that have anything to do with it? Because obviously things have changed since COVID.
I think it can for some, but overall, I wouldn't say so. There are some issues. There were a lot of access issues during COVID, right? Access to KOLs, access to institutions, and some of those haven't loosened back up after COVID. So that is an issue. And then, of course, I mean, we're on Zoom now, right? The use of virtual meetings and virtual technology, it's great in some ways, but it's also changed the bar and the expected level of interactions, I think, in many cultures. A lot of people are complaining kids don't get snow days anymore. They have to go to Zoom school. So I think there is that kind of phenomenon, like we're expected to be available all of the time now because this is the norm.
Yeah. No, it's a different time. That's why I kind of thought as we were, preparing for this, if that was a thing. And, I really expected travel to be a big factor. You mentioned it, and I expected that to be a big factor. So I want to revisit that to ask you what's your recommendations for handling travel and getting ahead of it so that it doesn't become more of a stressor than it already is.
Yeah, travel, I don't think there are things about travel that are very stressful, but I don't think it inherently needs to be a stressor that causes burnout. A lot of us travel for fun as well, right?
Right.
I think for MSLs in particular, the pace of the travel is important and whether or not the travel is meaningful. And that's something that as an MSL, you might not always have control over, and you might need to work with your leadership to make sure it's true, right? If you're traveling because they want a body somewhere, but there's no real purpose and there's no real value behind that, that's the kind of travel that's more likely to lead to burnout than if you're doing something that you find is meaningful and important to the job, important for bringing value to patients. That's a different kind of travel. And I think the kind of support system you have at home when you leave is incredibly important. And I think that's important, whether you live by yourself or whether you have young children or parents that you're caring for. I mean, no matter what, there are things at home that aren't getting done if you're not there. And so having a system in place, someone that takes the garbage cans out, and not having to worry about that every time you leave, having that support is big.
Yeah, I travel a lot too, and it can be stressful. And I think one of the things that's helped me is I've become really organized so that I can eliminate the potential stress of travel, meaning I leave earlier. I know exactly how I'm getting to the airport, how I'm getting back from the airport. I have all my travel, I have somebody lined up, and I have the packing down. It's so foolproof now because I've spent so much time organizing myself ad nauseum to prevent any. Now, look, there's issues that are going to happen. If the flight gets delayed, it gets delayed. If it gets canceled, it gets canceled. It's totally out of our control. But the things that are in our control, that's what I'm trying to influence.
Yeah.
So let's talk about metrics for a second. We have to bring metrics up, obviously. We have to, right? Metrics and KPIs always seem to come up. How much of this would be performance anxiety, would you say?
I think any good MSL is going to be able to hit the numbers. But whether or not they're going to feel good about it is the difference, right? And that's where leadership needs to be thoughtful in what is the strategy driving that number? What does the number mean? Teeing up those metrics, how they're employed and how they're presented to the team. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek and start with why, right? If you start with the what, have 50 KOL interactions a month, and your why is so we can show our value to internal leadership, that's not very motivating for the MSL, and it implies that what they're doing isn't inherently valued. If your why is you want to become a medical affairs team that's really making changes and driving behavior to get better outcomes for patients, and then that leads to these 50 interactions that have meaning behind them and purpose behind them, and you're able to bring back actionable insights into your organization, that's a much different structure and a much different way of pitching it and then showing the MSLs what difference that made. I think that's important.
Yeah.
Closing that circle.
I think leadership has a lot to do with it. I totally do. And I think that for any leaders listening, I think it's important to be aware of that this is a thing. I'm sure they all are, but I think it's important to be aware. What do you let me ask you, as an MSL leader, what do you think? Should MSL managers be looking for warning signs of burnout? And should MSLs be paying attention to such a thing?
Yes, totally yes, because both the symptoms then become a problem. So when we were talking about contagion, uh, things that can be a sign of burnout in MSLs, they can also be a sign of other problems, but they're good to watch for and they're going to create problems in your team. So underperformance from people that used to be performing well is a real big sign of burnout. It can be a sign of other things also, but it's a sign of burnout. And it's obviously not something that's going to be great for the team, right? Competition amongst team members, that can be a sign of burnout. It can be a sign of other things as well, but it can be a sign of burnout. And that's not great within your team. That's not going to lead to your whole team doing better and succeeding.
Yeah, and I think that this is a wound that if it doesn't get treated, it could really fester and just get worse. And that's where that's where the toxic culture sets in. So obviously it's really important that managers are attuned to this so that they can stay ahead of it.
Yes.
What is your advice on what ways can MSLs handle the stress? What ways can they avoid burnout?
I could talk about this all day, Tom.
You got the floor, girl. Let's go.
So I think you alluded to some of them. So one of the big things for me is reducing decision fatigue. So when you talked about how you prep for travel, that's some of it, right? Having habits and systems in place that make some of those stressors avoidable. That can be things like, having your packing very well organized, knowing how you're going to get to and from the airport, knowing who's going to take the garbage out and water the plants while you're at home, not having to worry about that every time. These are habits and systems that are great. You can also have a habit of, especially, on days when you're working from home, creating some distance between work life and home life temporarily. As you said, at the end of the day, sometimes you're just exhausted. Taking even 3 or 5 minutes to just kind of sit quietly, recenter yourself. Maybe you do some planning for the next day so that you leave all that jumble of thoughts in your home office space versus taking it with you through the rest of your evening. I think that's really helpful. Setting boundaries. It can be boundaries between people. It can mean putting the do not disturb on your phone. This might not be something you need to do every time you step out of the office. I think there are things that happen after hours that are unavoidable, but knowing when you need that, creating that separation. Compassion for me is a big part of it. Compassion for your teammates. I don't always mean empathy, which I think could be a whole nother different conversation, but compassion and self-compassion and self-care, which includes things like getting enough sleep, going to the dentist, taking care of those basic needs for yourself and making sure your team is doing so. And then so many stressors are going to be unavoidable. So finding ways to discharge the stress. For some people, that's meditation or mindfulness. I think physical exercise, some sort of physical release is the best kind. If you are a zebra running through the savannah, right? You're getting chased by a lion, you're either dead or you're running as fast as your stripy little legs can carry you, right? And maybe you outrun that lion, you get back to your herd, you're bragging about how fast you were and you smoke that lion, and then all of those stress hormones get released, your heart rate slowly comes back to normal. It's just a really natural way to discharge that physiological stress response. So I love physical exercise. Some people don't. Some people prefer, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but maybe like partnered bedroom activities is a good way to discharge stress. Solo activities has been recommended. People that really hate exercise, progressive muscle relaxation can be a good way. So you just tighten one muscle at a time, hold it for a few seconds, and then slowly release it, working your way all the way down your body. That's a great way to get rid of stress. I think that gets rid of the stress when you can't get rid of the stressor.
Wow, that's an awesome list. First of all, I feel like you literally took the words right out of my mouth. If I had to answer that question, it's pretty much how I would have answered it. Habits are so important to put yourself into a state on purpose. the meditation thing is, I think, is a huge thing. And I'll share something with you guys. I've developed a new accountability partner, and that is I have an Aura ring. Some people have like the Whoop strap or whatever, but to be able to have a system or a device that gives you some diagnostics and actually tells you about yourself and how much sleep you're getting and it shows you your stress level, believe it or not. Is really helpful. And their app, the Aura app, actually has meditations in it. And I started doing those. And 5-minute meditation makes a huge, huge difference. It's crazy. You wouldn't think it would. For me, if I don't work out, I work out every day, every single day. I don't take any days off. And I know it's crazy. People are like, you're crazy, Tom, you're out of your mind. But I have to tell you, the reason I do that is not because I'm a total psycho, a little bit because of that. It's because of the way I feel when I don't work out. I don't want that feeling. So I'm very calculated about how I do it, but I agree with you that there has to be a system, a pattern, and just habits that you adopt that are going to help you cope with or prevent having this issue of total burnout because you're just not capable of handling. But I want to get back to something. You said exercise. So I see your videos. So guys, if you don't follow Jen on LinkedIn, she has this thing, which is awesome. I love it. She does these home workout videos in the middle of the day. Just, hey, everybody, you can do this. So I don't want to give it away. Can you tell everybody what it is and how this whole thing came about?
Yeah, so I started doing my midday movement. Now I do mid-Monday movement. Actually, much the same as you, exercise is the one thing that reliably helps me deal with stress. And I had actually just had knee surgery. And so I wasn't able to do what I normally did. It was a stressful time for me because both recovering from surgery and having my stress relief taken away. And so I started doing them as a bit of an accountability thing for myself to get my PT in every day and get a little bit of movement where I could. And also, I just love sharing that exercise doesn't have to be painful because some people think it is, right? For some people, it's a chore. And I think there's something for everyone that will work. You just have to find what that is. I've been teaching aerobics classes for 15 years, more than 15 years now. And I love sharing that with other people and seeing them. They don't always smile while they're doing push-ups, but they smile afterwards.
But here's the thing. Here's what I love about it. And I watch them and full transparency, I don't get up and do everything. But I will say, though, the one thing I have to give you tremendous credit for, you 100% hit the nail on the head. You make it so simple. And it's practical. It's like, I could do that. I could do that during the day and still get exercise. I think a lot of times people think exercise has to be this thing. Well, I needed to get 30 minutes on the treadmill. I needed to do this. It doesn't have to be a set program. It can really be just a series of movements or muscle flexes you guys, you should really follow Jen and check this out because I think there's a lot to learn about just simple ways that you can add a quick workout into your day that might, just like if you did a 5-minute meditation and that has an impact, this is the same kind of thing. So I'm hoping I didn't just bombard your inbox with LinkedIn people, but
thanks for the plug. And the point isn't to necessarily follow along and do it. It's more just a reminder for us all, get up from our desk for a minute. It's better for our eyes. It's better for our brains, better for our bodies.
I love it. And I totally agree. So what advice, let's get away from the burnout thing for a second. And what advice in general do you have for MSLs these days as we move into a relatively new year? What advice do you have?
So one thing that's been lurking in the back of our whole conversation, I think, is culture and values and how mismatches of that for an individual can lead to burnout. And I think everyone should know there are great work cultures out there. And you shouldn't stay stuck in a place that doesn't match what you want your work culture to look like and what your values are. Finding a new position or a better environment might not be an overnight thing, but it's out there. And so don't force yourself into that kind of hole. I think networking is also very important, and not just professional network, but your community network, building that support structure around you, and embracing your own strengths. People are generally enjoy doing what they're good at and good at doing things they enjoy. I mean, not always. I enjoy singing karaoke and I'm absolutely horrible at it. But
That's such a good
your
example.
strengths are, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's too funny.
Yeah. Know your strengths, lean into them, and know that it's okay that your strengths are different from your teammates' strengths. You spoke about comparing in your imposter syndrome podcast. And I think that that's a big one, right? We don't all have to be good at the same things, and we can lean on our teammates. And that's great. That's the great part about diversity.
Yeah. Man, you hit on so many things, and it's funny, but I did what you just said. Like, I did a podcast on core values. A lot of people don't really understand what that means and how important it is to align your core values with the core values and the culture of the organization. And you should know that if you don't. And the other thing is, I did a podcast called Lead with Your Strengths, Develop Your Weaknesses. I also wrote an article about it. So, I mean, I knew there was a reason why I had to have you come on this podcast. But you were awesome. Thank you for everything. Thank you for being here. You have to come back. I think this was a great conversation. Any final words? Final words of wisdom?
Thanks for having me. And, everybody go out there, exercise or progressively muscle, relax, and discharge your stress.
Awesome. I love it. Well, thank you, Jen. And thank you guys for listening. Thank you for sharing the show. Thank you for all your support. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to the show. And if you enjoyed it, please subscribe so that you don't miss an episode in the future. And feel free to leave a rating or a review or a comment. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you soon.